In Part 1, we journeyed through some of the world's oldest constitutions, discovering how documents like the Magna Carta, the San Marino Statutes, and the US Constitution laid the groundwork for modern governance. But these aren't the only historic charters with lasting impact. Across different cultures and centuries, other nations also crafted their own enduring frameworks, each bringing unique principles and values to the world stage. In Part 2, we'll continue our exploration, uncovering more of the oldest constitutions that have shaped societies, from Europe to Asia. Let's dive into the stories of these remarkable documents and see how their legacy still resonates today. The Constitution of Norway. The Constitution of Norway, adopted on May 17, 1814, is one of the world's oldest constitutions still in operation and one of the most liberal and democratic of its time. Drafted in the town of Eidsvoll, it was a bold assertion of Norwegian independence, coming at a time when Norway was moving away from Danish rule and seeking sovereignty in the wake of the Napoleonic Wars. The date, May 17th, is now celebrated as Norway's Constitution Day, marking its national identity and democratic values. Here are some key aspects of the Norwegian Constitution. Influence of Enlightenment ideals. The Constitution was heavily influenced by Enlightenment principles and the wave of liberal thinking that had inspired both the American and French revolutions. It emphasized popular sovereignty, the separation of powers, and individual freedoms, which were progressive ideas in early 19th century Europe. Structure and separation of powers. The Constitution of Norway established a constitutional monarchy with a separation of powers among three branches of government: legislative, Storting. The Storting is Norway's parliament, responsible for making laws and overseeing the government. Originally a unicameral legislature, it was temporarily bicameral before returning to a single-chamber system. Executive, King and Council of State. The king holds a symbolic role as the head of state, with real executive powers residing in the Council of State, the cabinet, which is led by the Prime Minister. Judicial and independent judiciary ensures that laws are interpreted and applied fairly, protecting citizens' rights and upholding the Constitution. Bill of Rights and Civil Liberties. The Constitution enshrines fundamental civil liberties, including freedom of expression, protection of property, and personal liberty. Although it has undergone amendments, these core rights remain central to Norway's legal system and democracy. Limited suffrage, later expanded. Originally, the Constitution limited voting rights to property-owning men, but suffrage expanded gradually over time, reaching universal suffrage in the early 20th century. Norway became one of the first countries in Europe to grant women the right to vote in 1913. Amendments and adaptability. Although the Norwegian Constitution has been amended numerous times to reflect modern values and changes in society, its core principles of democracy, freedom, and independence have remained intact. It has evolved to address issues such as voting rights, the rights of the Sami people, Norway's indigenous population, and gender equality. Norway's constitution is celebrated as one of the earliest democratic constitutions in Europe. The Constitution of the Netherlands. The Constitution of the Netherlands, also adopted in 1814, marked the foundation of the modern Dutch state after a period of political upheaval and foreign rule. Following the defeat of Napoleon and the end of French occupation, the Netherlands sought to establish a stable, unified government. The Constitution of 1814 was drafted to achieve this, laying the groundwork for a constitutional monarchy that has evolved over time to reflect democratic values. Here are some key aspects of the Dutch Constitution of 1814. Establishment of a constitutional monarchy. The 1814 Constitution established the Netherlands as a constitutional monarchy, with William I of the House of Orange as the first king. This framework balanced monarchical power with the beginnings of parliamentary governance, setting up a central government after years of fragmentation under previous regimes. Centralized government. Prior to 1814, the Dutch territories were largely decentralized, with significant local autonomy under the Dutch Republic. The new constitution aimed to unify the provinces under a centralized government, helping to consolidate power and establish a sense of national unity. This move was essential for stability, given the political turmoil of the preceding years. Limited parliamentary power in its original form, the 1814 constitution granted significant power to the king, while the role of the parliament, the States General, was limited. The king had considerable influence over both domestic and foreign policy, and parliamentary powers were initially weak. This would later change with subsequent amendments as democratic values gained prominence in Dutch society. Role of the States General. The States General, a legislative body that included representatives from each province, was re-established under the constitution. However, it initially had limited authority and primarily served as an advisory body to the king. It was divided into two chambers in 1815 with the creation of the United Kingdom of the Netherlands, bringing together the northern and southern Netherlands, modern-day Belgium. Amendments and evolution. The Dutch constitution has undergone significant amendments since 1814, especially in 1848 when liberal reforms transformed the country into a true constitutional monarchy. Under the leadership of Johann Rudolf Thorbecke, a prominent liberal politician, the 1848 amendments introduced parliamentary accountability, significantly reducing the power of the monarchy and increasing the role of elected representatives. This shift laid the groundwork for modern Dutch democracy. Individual rights and democratic principles. The Constitution of 1814 focused on establishing governance structures rather than explicitly defining individual rights. However, later amendments incorporated civil rights protections and democratic principles. Over time, the Dutch constitution evolved to include rights such as freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and equality before the law, reflecting the nation's commitment to human rights. Influence on modern Dutch identity. The Constitution of 1814 and its subsequent amendments played a crucial role in shaping the Netherlands as a unified, democratic state. The reforms of the 19th and 20th centuries gradually transformed the country from a monarchy with strong royal powers to a parliamentary democracy, with the Constitution as the central legal framework for governance. Legacy. While the original 1814 Constitution established a centralized state under a constitutional monarchy, it is the successive amendments, particularly in 1848 and beyond, that shaped the Netherlands as a modern democratic society. The Dutch constitution is seen as a living document, continually evolving to reflect changing societal values, from women's suffrage in 1917 to protections for social rights in the 20th century. The Constitution of Belgium. The Belgian Constitution of 1831 is one of the most progressive and influential constitutions of its time. Drafted in the wake of the Belgian Revolution, which separated Belgium from the United Kingdom of the Netherlands, the constitution laid the foundations for Belgium as an independent, constitutional monarchy, and one of the most liberal states in Europe. It served as a model for many later European constitutions and marked a significant advancement in democratic governance and individual freedoms. Here are some key aspects of the Belgian Constitution of 1831. Establishment of a constitutional monarchy. The 1831 Constitution established Belgium as a constitutional monarchy, choosing Leopold I as its first king. Although Belgium was a monarchy, the king's powers were limited by the constitution, and his role was largely symbolic in governing the country. The monarchy was intended to provide unity and stability, but real political power was vested in elected bodies. Separation of powers. The Belgian constitution emphasized the separation of powers among the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. This was a direct response to the perceived absolutism of monarchies in Europe at the time. The separation of powers in Belgium was designed to prevent any single branch from becoming too powerful, and to ensure a balanced and accountable government. Executive: the king served as the head of state, but his powers were mostly ceremonial, with executive authority exercised by the ministers. Legislative: the legislature was a bicameral parliament, consisting of a Senate, and a Chamber of Representatives. Members of both chambers were initially elected by a limited electorate, although suffrage was gradually expanded over time. Judicial: the judiciary was established as an independent branch, with judges appointed for life to ensure impartiality and protect individual rights. Liberal ideals and individual rights: the Belgian constitution was highly liberal for its time, with strong protections for individual rights and freedoms. It guaranteed freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, and the right to assembly. These rights were groundbreaking and reflected Enlightenment ideals, establishing Belgium as one of the most free societies in Europe at the time. Secular state: the constitution established Belgium as a secular state, guaranteeing freedom of religion and separating church and state. This was a significant step for a country with a strong Catholic heritage. The government could not interfere with religious practices, nor could religious institutions influence state decisions, creating a modern secular framework that allowed for religious diversity. Limited suffrage: with later expansion. Initially, the Belgian constitution restricted voting rights to property-owning males, effectively limiting political participation to the wealthy elite. However, suffrage was gradually expanded over the decades, first to include more men and later women, with universal suffrage eventually achieved in the 20th century. Influence on European constitutions: the Belgian Constitution of 1831 was widely admired and influential across Europe, especially among liberal movements. Its commitment to individual freedoms, parliamentary democracy, and constitutional monarchy served as a model for other countries seeking similar reforms. It inspired constitutional frameworks in countries such as Italy and Luxembourg, and it influenced liberal reforms throughout Europe. Adaptability and evolution: although the 1831 constitution was highly progressive, it has undergone amendments to reflect changing societal values. Key reforms included the expansion of voting rights, social protections, and linguistic rights for the country's French, Dutch, and German-speaking communities. These changes have allowed the constitution to remain relevant and adaptable to Belgium's evolving political landscape. Multilingual and federal state: in the 20th century, Belgium's constitution was amended to accommodate the country's diverse linguistic and cultural communities, leading to a federal structure. Today, Belgium is divided into regions and linguistic communities, each with its own degree of autonomy. Throughout history, constitutions like those of Norway, the Netherlands, and Belgium have set powerful examples of governance, democracy, and adaptability. Each of these documents reflects the values and challenges of its time while evolving to meet the needs of modern society. Their enduring influence and commitment to human rights and democratic ideals resonate today, inspiring nations worldwide. In future parts, we'll continue to explore other significant constitutions and the lasting impact they have on societies across the globe. Thank you for joining us on this journey through constitutional history.